Hello, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here. I don't know how many people are here. I'm joined. I'm excited to be here. I am humbled to be given the opportunity to lead this session with you all. Today we're going to be talking about some really good stuff. I hope you had your cafecitos ready um, and your systems. I want to begin by saying that the focal point of this conversation is to talk about what it means to be an anti-racist educator, and we're going to dive into that. We're going to really dive into that. Um, and one thing I ask of you is to participate as much as you can. When I was crafting this session, I wanted to make sure to engage the audience as much as possible. So to give you some context, last year, me and a good friend of mine, Alfredo, we led a session and we got really good feedback. So I was asked to lead another session this year. And so I'm excited. I do want to leverage all the knowledge that's out there. So I want to draw you in with some good questions and hopefully bring some of you on screen too. The other point that I want to make is that I apologize in advance for all the technical difficulties that might happen. I'm new to Crowdcast and I'm new to this, so I just do want to say I apologize in advance for that. So we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see here. All right, cool. So hopefully you guys can see my screen right now. Let's go ahead and let's build a community in the chat box. Please write in the chat box what you do and where you're from. I want to see all the beautiful faces out there, where they're from, and what you guys do as far as the work. Thank you. Okay, I'm looking at the chat right here. Thank you for the flowers, Francisco. Elementary, ECL, Sarah, and KCK. We have a Spanish teacher in Lee Summit named Lynette. Nice to meet you, Lynette. Got a lot of KC people in the house. Kansas City. Great. Eduardo, Ed, hey, how you doing, Ed? Olivia, I see you, Olivia. Chicago in the house. Nice. Yes, Isol, Sadie, nice to meet you. All right, well, hopefully you guys get to meet, get to see each other. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Roberto Diaz. I am a professor at Metropolitan Community College, Penn Valley. I teach early child education, and I'm also a graduate student getting my education specialist degree at UMKC. So that's a little bit about myself. Let's move on to the next slide. So again, this session is called How to Be an Anti-Racist Educator. It's a guide and a discussion by me and a good friend of mine that was supposed to join, but he couldn't join us today. What I want to say is that I want to emphasize the fact that this is more of a discussion. It's not necessarily me coming as an expert to tell you all this information about how to be an anti-racist educator, but more of me leveraging the voices that are out there by using the chat boxes and asking some questions, and then hopefully bringing some of you onto the screen. That's what my goal was when I was crafting this presentation. A little bit about the agenda. We're going to go over for some definitions, some data, and a gallery walk-in for the first 15 minutes. And then we're going to jump into some live questions for the next 15 minutes, and then we're going to jump into scenarios for the last 15 minutes. The live question, the scenarios are very engaging features that hopefully you guys participate in. Again, my objective is to leverage the voices of the group and discuss what it means to be an anti-racist educator. And the community agreements that I think are best to hold in this space are to make sure that we demonstrate respect for each other, we listen, and we participate/engage. If we can follow those three, I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful time here. All right, so let's get to it. So to answer this question, just kind of get a read of the room. Go ahead and use a chat box to write where you're at right now. When it comes to discussing race to your day-to-day, are you A, you rather not talk about race, or are you somewhere between F, which is you feel very comfortable talking about race? We got some F's, some D's, some E's, couple E's. Nice. Okay, this is good. I see a lot of F's and a lot of E's. So hopefully, those people who are on the lower end or A's or B's, by the end of the session, you feel a little bit more comfortable to get into like the C's or the D's or the F's. For those that are F's, I empower you to come to the screen to be able to share a little bit of your thought process behind having conversations on race. So let's learn about some definitions. Number one, racism. What does it mean? I'm using the definitions from Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. The definition he uses for racism is he involves one group having the power to carry out systemic discrimination through institutional practices and by shaping the cultural beliefs and values that support those racist policies and practices. For racist, he says, one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, which is a key word right there, inaction, or expressing a racist idea. And what an anti-racist means is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing anti-racist ideas. So completely what the opposite thing of what racists do. I'm sure most of you know some of the definitions or you guys have your own definitions, but these are the definitions I'm using to describe what it is to me an anti-racist educator. So here's a picture of racism in education. So let's stop. Let's take a step away. Let's change gears here. Let's talk about racism in education because we know racism in education exists. And I put this picture up here because for me, when I saw this picture, represented something in my head of how racism exists in education. Go ahead and use the chat box to describe what connection can you make between this picture and racism in education. Yeah, Sarah said it's embedded in so much. Infiltrated, nice. Intertwined, tangled web of lies. It's an entanglement. Gretchen said it's everywhere. Yes, Gretchen. I like Brittany, which Brittany said, racism is part of the fabric and design of our public school system, but we have a lot of untangling to do. Yes. Snaps to that. Tangled in white privilege. Ooh. Nice. I mean, you guys hit it right on the money. It's pretty much what everyone is saying. It's intertwined, embedded, ingrained, integrated. When I came across this picture, the way I interpreted racism in education was that it's really interconnected with other things. So if you try to address one part of racism in education, you're pulling on other things of racism in education. So when you cannot address one thing and hopefully this thing is going to go away. It's really, you have to disentangle all of it. And that's a really difficult thing to do, but it must be done. Which goes into the second part, and this is a question that I'm going to ask: is what are some ways racism is hidden in education? I'm sure there's hundreds of ways that racism is hidden in education. I'd like to hear from the audience. What are some ways that you think racism is hidden in education? Through what systems? Through what methods is racism hidden in education? Well, I want to highlight Anissa Abrego. She said initiatives that don't really lead to change, many dead ends. Well, that's a really good statement. The text we are provided to work with, absolutely. In the curriculum, racial bias assessments, curriculum grading. Lauren said Eurocentric curriculum, text assessments, standardized testing, behavioral consequences, Rosie, yes. Police in schools, yes. Everyone is getting it right on the money. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next one. So this next slide is kind of this image that I used at the last presentation, at the last year, I used it to kind of fit it into this presentation, which is this one. And again, this is not the whole picture. There's many thousands more ways that there's racism exists in education. But I mean, everyone in the chat is pretty much hit on all of these. Dress codes, behavior and discipline systems, cutoff scores for AP, curriculum, test prep, culture, internet and resource access, classroom power dynamics, grading policies, labeling of IEPs, funding, leadership, teacher to student ratio, hiring requirements and practices. And again, there's thousands of more. I'm sure you can come up with more. But I want to show this image because again, it's hidden, it's intertwined through these methods. And again, it's entangled, and sometimes it's really hard to address, but it must be addressed. The point that I will make is that a lot of these are intentional too. Some may be unconscious of how they're doing it. A lot of teachers may just be following the system, like, well, this is what I was taught to do. But through those systems, it's really intentional of who created them. And a perfect example, and I'm gonna share a story from mine, where I used to work at my old school, there was a drug test given to teachers at the beginning of the year to ensure if they were gonna be employed or not. You know, we'd have fantastic teachers, like fabulous teachers applying, they were hired, and the last thing they had to do was pass a drug test. And when it came to the drug test, they failed the drug test and they were discarded. And we didn't hire them. And I think for me, I was really hurt by that because one, we're in need of teachers. And number two, I think drug testing is a form of not allowing teachers of color to join the field personally. And I think it's a barrier that's intentional. It's intentionally put there because after the initial drug test, teachers don't get drug tested after that. So I didn't really understand what was the purpose of it in my eyes. And so one thing that I brought up to my school leadership was like, is there a way where we can give a heads up to the applicants to know that there's a drug screen coming? Or, is there a way we can just get rid of it? And because of the union, we couldn't. But I did have to speak up because I felt like there was an injustice there that was separate, that was not allowing teachers of color to enter the field at our school. And I think that was something that I wanted to make sure that at least I did something about. So moving on. So again, going back to summarize what I just stated, there's a lot of racism embedded in education, but I think the biggest one is the overwhelming majority of white teachers and white leadership in the nation's school systems. So right here I have some data points. It's a bit outdated, so I apologize for that, but it's actually from the Department of Education from 2016. And I can guarantee you that this mimics to what we see today in 2020. 80% of teachers are white, 80% of principals are white, and 82% of public school teachers are white. And again, we know the research shows that teachers of color in front of students of color has a significant impact on them. The other thing is that in recent years, in 2018, there was 3,265 incidents of hate or bias. So all this to say is that aside from all the racism that exists in education, it's also dominantly white. And I think that's something that we all are aware of, but we have to make sure that as anti-racist educators, we try to fight against it in some ways. And we're gonna talk about that in the next coming slides. Let me look at this chat box a little bit. Yes, this chat's going off, by the way. So, keep engaging because there's so much learning going on. Hopefully the people that are in the chat box, you guys are reading other people's comments because there's just so much going on. I'm trying to do both right now, lead the session at the same time, look at the chat box, so just give me a little bit of grace. Let's see. I lost this tab. Give me 1 second. All right, here we go. Here's a quote by the Education Secretary, John B. King. He says, without question, when the majority of students in public schools are students of color and only 80% of our teachers are teachers of color, we have an urgent need to act. The question for the nation is, how do we address this quickly and thoughtfully? And that's a question I'm sure every one of us thinks about or has thought about. It sure keeps me up at night to think, how do we get more teachers of color in the field, especially when we know education is an undervalued field. And I think that's just obviously not fair at all. So here's what we're gonna do next. We're shifting into the gallery walk. And the purpose of this gallery walk is to kind of get your wheels turning and to think. And if you see something that really resonates with you, reiterate in the chat box. or hold on to it so when I go into the live question, you can come up and speak about it. The gallery walk is pictures of just posts, Twitter's comments that I've saw in the past years. I've collected them. Every time I come across something that's like, oh yes, like props to that, I save it on my phone. So what I did was I put all my pictures on that I have on my phone onto these next couple slides, and you'll see kind of some really good logical arguments that are made towards racism in education. So just take some time to look through these. I'm gonna give you about a minute. Diana, yes, I want to reiterate your statement. Early childhood education is definitely a field where um, there's lower expectations and lower pay, for sure. All right, I'm gonna go on to the next gallery, the next slides. I really like the one that says there are schools and school districts that will ignore the voices of Black students, Black parents, and Black staff members for years and years, and then turn around and hire an outside agency to come and talk about equity. How is that so? There's just I can't describe how many schools after the Black Lives Matter movement reached out to other agencies to come into the school and try to fix racism. I think for me, I think that's just I think that's an insult to the people that they serve because it's like I get it that they're trying to reach out to get professional help, but at the same time, it's like I think you should begin by addressing the voices that are in the room before you reach out to someone else to kind of help you with it. Because I think it sends a message like, I can't deal with this, so let me get someone else to deal with it. That's my perception of it. Other people be like, you know what? I think it's important to kind of get external resources. But again, I'd like to hear what you guys think in the chat. The disrupting grind culture is a big one, and I think that's something that I put on there because there's just been an overhaul that children of color need to be resilient and they need to be pushed so they can excel more. Some people think that they need to do that, and some people think that I think it's an overstep in education. Having children go to school from 7 a.m. to like 6 p.m. for after tutoring just because of the fact that they're disadvantaged, I think it really bothers me pretty much. So that's something. Police in schools is a big one too. At my school when I was in high school, I grew up in Pomona, California, and I worked. Well, I actually attended a school that was all predominantly Latino, and there would be always police officers with their batons, kind of just quote unquote guarding the campus during lunch, and it just sends a message of like we're just being observed, you know, like we're being watched, and it was uncomfortable for me. And after having an educational lens, I realized how bad that was for our students. Push Out is a good book that talks about how the discrimination or the kind of behavior of young Black girls is in the school. It's a good book to check out, and I think it also plays into this whole idea of racism. And then there's one more. Move on to the next one. This one. Take a minute to kind of process through all these. Teach Like a Champion is a big book that is used in many charter schools. There's people say there's some really good stuff in it. I've been able to check some stuff out. But this comment which said teach like an anti-racist instead of teach like a champion, I think I was like, whoa, like that's deep, you know? Because again, this idea that there's so much, and we're gonna get into it right now, but there's so much structure behind educating children, disadvantaged children, or underserved, underrepresented children. I think that's something that conversation needs to be held, and hopefully we can have it here in our session in a couple minutes. So yeah, hopefully this kind of got you kind of fired up a bit, kind of got your wheels turning. I want you to talk about, or in the chat box, what is the benefit or risk of talking about racial issues with others in your building? I think that's a question that also needs to be held. For those of you who said F in the beginning, said I feel comfortable with it, I'm pretty sure that, you know, you've probably accepted the risk of talking about racial issues in your building, because you realize that there's a greater good than the risk that you'll have if you have these conversations that will come about. Like there's more progress that you care more about than the risk that you'll take, even if it's maybe risking your employment or whatever, because you're standing for something that you believe in. But other people who might feel like, who chose A, might feel like, you know what, it's a risk that I'm not willing to take because one, I don't understand it, and I also don't want to rub people come off as the wrong way. So what I'd like to hear your thoughts. You'll be seen as too woke or seen as a complainer, or that I'm too sensitive. Yes. The benefit is our children, definitely. That's the benefit of having these conversations. Benefit is opening the eyes of people who just still don't understand it's still an issue. Risk is the vulnerability. Well, that's a big one. Having teachers think about implicit bias, how it leads to racism. It's the only road to liberation. Yes. It might be an issue of you, just you. Yes, again, this chat is really going off. I appreciate all the comments being shared. All right. Continue processing that question. I'm gonna jump into the live questions because we're running a little bit behind time. So this we're gonna do for live questions. I really want to garner a discussion, and I want to bring a couple people to the screen to kind of just have like kind of a podcast discussion between me and you. Hopefully we in this group we have people who are agreeable with both ends. I'm gonna pose a question that's controversial, and if you feel like this is something that you agree with, I encourage you to come and share. If you feel like this is something that you disagree with, I encourage you to share too. If we don't have people who disagree, I'm going to take the role of devil's advocate, and I'm just going to try to pick the brain of the person who's coming up. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but I'm willing to do it. So again, I'm going to ask my facilitator to come up, Daniel. Daniel, after I show this question, if you feel you want to talk about it, please say it in the chat, and then Daniel will put you on the live screen. So number one is, do you believe students should be required to stand up and recite the Pledge of Allegiance in schools? What are your thoughts? I'd like to hear from a couple people. Whoever's willing to step up and share their thoughts on the screen with me. So we got some comments already. Sarah said no, it's brainwashing. Okay. Reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in the school, should that be required for students? Absolutely not. No, it should be taught. All right, I see Joshua said yes. They should have a choice. Absolutely not. We don't do it in my school. Okay, is there anyone who's willing to come onto the screen to share a little bit about the thought process? I'd like to hear some voices out there. Well, that's a good comment. They should not be required. They can make a decision based on what they believe. No, absolutely not. I remember my mother, an immigrant, was horrified. She was normal. All right. I'm not sure. Okay, Kayla said I'm not sure. She said it didn't affect me really until I grew older and learned about America. Oh, Diana Cornejo Sanchez said, "What pledges are government making to our children?" Wow, that's deep. I'm definitely gonna hold on to that comment. No, it's the same thing as singing the national anthem. It should be up to the individual. I do not know how to expand the comments on my screen. All right. Hopefully this question, we didn't get a lot of people to come up. Let's move on to the next question. All right, this is a bigger one. This one says, many schools around the country expect students to display specific actions to ensure they are learning. Most common acronyms are SLANT, sit up, listen, ask and answer questions, nod your head, attract the speaker, STAR. Some argue that this is controlling of bodies and neglect student autonomy and choice. Others argue it is a necessary way for students to stay engaged and learn. Do you believe rudimentary classroom management practices that result in optimal data outcomes are justified? What are your thoughts? This is something that's been controversial throughout the education field. There are many charter schools that are adopting methods of this nature, and I just kind of want to get a feel. I would assume that there's some teachers out there in this chat that work in schools like this, and if so, I would like to kind of get your thoughts. What do you think? Is this something good or bad? Where does the data come from? This is a safe place. Absolutely not. This is compliance and control. Compliance and control. All right. Is anybody willing to come up to the screen to talk about a little bit about the thoughts? All right, Olivia. Olivia, we have my friend Olivia Flores. Daniel, can you bring Olivia to the screen, please? Or Vince? Uh-oh. I don't know if they can hear me. Latinx Education Collaborative, are you there? I can't bring people on stage. I'm not the facilitator, so someone has to bring them up. All right, cool. Latinx Education Collaborative is here. Can you bring Olivia to the screen?
Hi, can you hear me?
How you doing?
It's so good to see you. ¿Cómo estás?
Man, how you doing, Olivia? I'm glad me and Olivia know each other. We're both Green Fellows. So I'm glad that she's joining me here. Olivia, so let's. I want to ask you the question. What are your thoughts on this controversial topic? Where do you stand?
I think it's a really good time to think about this especially this year when like lots of systems like Uncommons coming to the front here, like other schools are being criticized for these kinds of systems and behavior systems that they've implemented. And something that I've been thinking about most recently has been like, why outside of like elementary school, like basic, like, acronyms for compliance and making sure you're not yelling and pushing people in the hallways. Yeah. I think this goes a little bit further than that. I think a lot of the systems that I've noticed in KC, especially public charter schools, seem to be taking it to like another level, yeah, where it does seem to resonate and does seem to like feel like we're policing bodies, that we're really, really maintaining a lot of control and teaching kids to feel controlled by systems that were created by, white administrators that have origins of race, racist practices. And so I think one thing that I'm just wondering is like, okay, these like behavior systems seem to be, I mean, they only exist primarily in public charter schools that serve populations of color. And so when I like think about that, I'm like, well, this seems really weird, right? Yeah. Like this seems really problematic if high performing schools in other areas, maybe other high performing urban schools that serve other populations may not have this. So, and yet we require it almost for a high performing public charter school.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're making a really good point. And again, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. How do you rebuttal the fact that the data shows that it's working. Like, what do you do in a situation where like you're making an argument like this is policing student bodies, but the argument is that, well, the data shows that they're actually graduating and going to college, which is the central goal of helping children. And,
I think,
how do you like what are your thoughts on that?
can we I'm not a data girl myself. I study literature and British literature, but like if we're looking at data, can we really separate it or attribute it to these behavior systems, or can we attribute it to like the large amounts of money that we're putting in college, what's it called, counseling services, the large amount of money we put in teacher prep or finding the best candidates for blah blah blah. Like there are so many other like factors that could mean like that could be attributed to that data, right? Yeah. And I think one thing that like kind of rubs me the wrong way is like when I think about like a family of color making this decision of like, okay, well, like my family in Chicago, I have a cousin who attended a Noble school, and their decision was like, okay, we can go to the public school or we can go to a Noble school is kind of like same, if for those of you who might not know, like same sort of structure as like an uncommon school or other public charter schools in Kansas City. And it's a decision where you're like, okay, there are much better graduation rates, much more resources, much more attention to my child if my child attends this Noble school, as opposed to the not as guaranteed graduation rates from the public school. And so when you're making that decision, you're like, well, I don't really like how maybe how they talk to my kid, maybe how the strict regulations of how they're moving their body, how they're talking, maybe more than, again, what's, safe or like basic safety protocol. And they have to make this choice. And I think a lot of times when I'm talking to people, and I'm still Roberto, I'm still like trying to like figure this out, like how I feel about this. But I just think about like how they have to make that choice, and they like concede or like qualify it, like, well, at least they're gonna get into a good college, or at least I know they will graduate high school. And then it's kind of like, well, okay, we'll deal with it. Do families of color have to deal with it? Like, is that the only option to protect these systems?
That's a really good question. I'm glad to hear what other people think in the chat. I know we see some little bit of toggle of clashing inside the chat box. But Olivia, I'm thank you for joining me. I'd like to continue this conversation later on.
Okay.
And thank you for joining. I really like it, your thought process and the question you raised. Should parents of color have to accept this in order to get their students to go to college? That's another question or follow-up.
Just some wonderings.
That's a good wondering.
Thanks, Roberto.
Thank you. All right, let's see. I'm gonna go back to the breakout session. Can you guys still see my screen or no? I think you guys can. All right. The second question that I want to talk about or wrestle with is this. This is a big topic as well. Some schools require their teachers to correct students' slang, syntax, dialect, and grammar to ensure children are learning the standard language, or quote unquote the proper English language. The logic usually behind this decision is to ensure students are speaking the language of opportunity, proficiency, and preparedness. Others argue this is a method of assimilation to white dominant culture. So in other words, if I am speaking with the slang, or am I speaking with words like, I ain't gonna do that, or I'm finna do that. Some call it ebonics. Should teachers have to correct that type of language in the classroom? Yes or no? What are your thoughts? And again, I like to have someone from the chat box to come volunteer, kind of share me the thought process, what they think behind this. So Natalie said it's 100% assimilation. I will scream if I hear someone correct ask for ask again verbally. Katia Rodriguez said something earlier, which is I want to emphasize. She said, as someone who works with data on a daily basis, I can tell you that numbers only tell you so much. If you show me narrative piece, quality data of students telling you that it was effective and actually helped them, I would believe you. Also, it is that data showing you longitudinal research showing that these acronyms are in fact helping them in the long run. Oh, I see. That's a really good question. I teach Spanish. We should be against the colonial mindset. Students need to know how and when to code switch. Oh, that's it. That's a powerful statement. Ed Mendez says students need to know how to and when to code switch. Ed, I would like to hear more about your thought process on that. Should students be required to code switch in order for the sake of the survival, or should the white dominant culture adapt to who they are and accept them for who they are without having to code switch? And that's making me think of that question. Linguistic oppression is real. No, we should not correct that. Natalie Rosenfield said she'll share. Latinx Education Collaborative, can you bring Natalie Rosenfield to the screen? I'd like to hear her thought process. I'm gonna give you a couple more seconds to think about that question. Read a little bit about the chat. This chat is really, really going off right now. Let me grab my charger because I'm at 8% with my screen. Give me 1 second.
Hey, are you able to hear and see me?
Yeah, is this Sarah?
Great. So I am my high school's librarian. I'm also their Orton Gillingham specialist for high school. My student population is primarily Latinx and African American, and I myself am a child of an immigrant. I grew up speaking a different language than English in the home. And I know that as a child attending school who did not speak English fluently, I learned to not trust my teachers when speaking because I would speak English with a strong accent at the time or using different language, including slang from Switzerland, which is where my family is from.
Yeah.
And now as an adult teaching Orton Gillingham to students, I was trained in this program that's supposed to be this amazing program for kids who have learning disabilities for reading, but it is 100% aimed at white students. It is about learning how to speak white English. And it's been a huge struggle because I feel like when I'm doing it, I'm stripping my students of their identity by taking that slang away from them or telling them that that's not how they're supposed to be learning. And it's led to the fact that I don't use Orton Gillingham anymore, even though I invested thousands of dollars to learn how to do it, because I don't want to strip my students of their identity. I mean, yes, we do want to teach them how to write formal essays, and we do want to teach them the skills that they need to be in society, but any lesson that ends with, so here's how to code switch, is a bad lesson, because we're teaching them there's something wrong with the way they are.
So Natalie, you bring up a really good point. Again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Do you feel that if we don't necessarily teach our students how to speak proper English, that they'll be able to be take advantage of the right opportunities and later in life? Like you're saying, like for example, like, you know, having a conversation in an interview and if they're not speaking proper English, might hinder the opportunity to even get the job. Again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Or not writing necessarily a proper form, a proper essay with the right grammar might hinder them to even get accepted into a college in their application. So like what?
I think that there's a difference between telling somebody that the way that they are speaking naturally is wrong and they need to fix it, or teaching them. I see it like art. You have to learn the basics before you can break the rules. And things like slang and alternative syntax, that's breaking the rules. So teach them the basics and give them the room to break the rules when they wish to break the rules.
Okay. All right. Well, Natalie, thank you so much. I really like that comment that you're making. Thank you for sharing that thought process. This chat, again, I want to look through this chat right here. We have a lot of a difference of opinions in this chat box. When it comes to this, some people are saying code switching is necessary, that they should be able to do both. And some people are saying that we shouldn't have to code switch, that children shouldn't have to code switch. Wow, I have 2 minutes left. There was so much more that I wanted to cover, man, and we definitely need more than 45 minutes. What is proper English? Robert Simmons asks. As a white teacher, I too often think I'm preparing kids of color for a white culture I have no control over, rather than someone who is reinforcing an oppressive system that I can impact. This is a good reminder to get better. Exactly. It's about the approach.
Roberto, I'm sorry to interrupt this great conversation. I just want to make sure that if we have a hard close to this session, that everybody knows it wasn't on purpose. It's just difficult to cut a great conversation short.
Definitely difficult. I understand. Hopefully, there was much more that I want to talk about. I wanted to talk about scenarios. I also wanted to share a topic. I wanted to have someone share a topic of something they think is something relevant and they want to bring up to the table, controversial topic. But we didn't get a chance to do that. Here's what we can do. I'm going to jump into the last part, which is kind of the closer. Again, these are some scenarios that we're going to go over. But I'm going to jump into the last part because I want to close off at least in some type of manner. The next step is to vote. It really comes down to voting. And teaching is really political. You know, our kids, our students of color, their lives are at stake. And we need to make sure that as teachers, we're not only educating them, but we're also speaking up for them and taking our civil duty to vote. Here's what's at stake. You know, we had 2 administrations. And again, teaching is really political. That's why I'm getting into the politics of it. As we know, Trump and Biden have different stances on education. Trump has taken a lot of money out of the education in the past years, amounting to $5 billion. Also, he's a staunch supporter of private schools. And when you think about it, a lot of the public school money is going to fund private schools. When it comes to Biden, though, he supports Title I funding. He believes in early child education as universal pre-K, which is really essential. Again, as a passionate early child educator, it's fundamental to teach children at an early age the skills of social emotional readiness and academics. Community college, 2 years of not paying tuition, and then also the number of mental health professionals in the school is necessary. So again, you can do your research. You can go to NEA.org to kind of look at some of the stances of where they stand at when it comes to education. And the last thing I would say is this quote, which says, "Our country needs to acknowledge and reckon with the history of systemic racism and racial discrimination. Instead, the Trump administration is leading with ignorance and moving to ban training that could help address the issue." This is an attack on the right for racial justice. As you know, Trump has made a statement that he wants to get rid of anti-racist work from the government, from institutions. And I think it goes to show that he realizes that there's a problem of people of color realizing that this country is built on systemic oppression. And by him not teaching these things, I think it's a call for war. And I think as educators, we need to make sure that we stand up and enact anti-racist mindsets and anti-racist education. I'm gonna leave you with the last thing. If there's anything you can take away from this, is just resources. Go ahead and click this link. There's some resources that are organized in podcasts and in books. I encourage you to continue your journey for anti-racist education. Again, I apologize for not having more time to speak about this because the conversation was getting just so good. But again, thank you for all that you do. Please go ahead and change the lives of those wonderful children in our world and continue pursuing anti-racist education in the forefront of your mind. So thank you. Thank you so much. Eduardo, yes, let's definitely get cafecito.